What's up, everyone? How's it going? They let us get to Friday again, so here we are for another episode of the Leaf Podcast. In this episode, there's not really an overarching theme, it's just kind of a collection of things that I found that I thought would be cool to talk about. And as always, if you enjoyed the videos, please like and subscribe and all that great stuff. And I think for the first one, we'll go into this story that I found that happened from Washington that was 2 miles from the Canadian border. So the guy says that he was gardening with his friend. It was on his personal property in the spring of 2018. He said that when all this happened, his friend was a couple hundred feet away, and he notes that his friend is partially blind and seems to be a little bit deaf sometimes, or he could just be dumb. He says he doesn't really know. So he walked by 3 huge bushes that were under a patch of large trees, and his body suddenly stops. He can't move. But it's almost like his body forces him to look at these particular set of bushes. He says that it almost felt like some sort of survival mechanism from an age gone by. So chills started going up and down his spine as he heard flapping, like a bird flapping, but it sounded like the size of a utility van or even larger. Before he could even really process it, his legs were already running away. And he went back and grabbed his shotgun. He runs to his friend who seems to not have heard anything, and he tells them that they need to go check it out, despite everything in his body telling him to just stay away, leave that area. His friend, though, says that maybe they should just pretend it didn't happen and just stay away from that area, and eventually, after some convincing, he agrees. And he's like, okay, whatever, we'll get back to work. The relief and peace lasts all of 10 minutes before they hear an ear-piercing screech that comes from the bushes of lengths to which neither of them had ever heard. He said it was the loudest effing bird call he's ever heard. He said his friend definitely heard this one, and he comes running over like a track star on crack. They both look at each other and then run down to the cabin, and nothing happens outside of that for about a week or so. Then they say a week later, he was with the same friend, and they were driving back from a town that was kind of at night, kind of at that dusk area. And they see this weird gray-colored being. They said it looked like the size of a condor, and that it was kind of a bird type thing. It was off the side of the road. He says that he has never seen a bird that looks like this, and the sound was so loud that the people in the valley had to have heard it. Then he says that they have a lot of high strangeness in this area, the most common strange part, I guess if you can call it that, being a lot of Bigfoot sightings, and that they happen so frequently and that there's so much evidence of them that most of the local LEOs believe that Sasquatch are real. So what do you think this was? Do you think that it was like just some kind of bird that had a different color? Because that can happen in the wild. It's pretty uncommon, but it happens. For some reason, though, the picture that comes into my head is almost like a pterodactyl. I'm going to be honest. I don't know why that's the one that kind of popped into my head. I suppose the reason why that is because it mentions high strangeness, and in areas where there's a lot of high strangeness, you see a lot of things that appear to be almost time slips. You'll see like a dinosaur 1 minute and then the next minute it's gone. I wonder if this was the same type of thing where he saw it in these 2 experiences that were a week apart and then appears to have never seen it ever again. So is it a time slip? Is it in a weird area where like high strangeness just happens? And of course, with a lot of high strangeness stuff, it can kind of delve into extraterrestrial stuff. And we're going to talk about aliens in a bit here. But I was thinking last week, after I recorded the episode, I think we've all heard at least one encounter with some kind of extraterrestrials, even just seeing a UFO, that some people seem to have poltergeist-like activity in their house or around their property. Now, there's a few theories as to why that is, but I kind of wonder if maybe in some way the energy or the kind of energy that's expelled attracts spirits for a short period of time. I don't know. It's just a weird thought that I had. I don't know if it's right or if it's possible. I just thought that it kind of sounded interesting, so I'm going to leave that up to you guys. Let me know what you think about that. Is it because of the kind of energy, such as electromagnetic energy, that's expelled that could attract spirits that are kind of just wandering around? Or is it something else entirely? I even heard one theory that the energy or energy in general has a consciousness, and that's kind of it acting out. I don't know. I would have to read more into that. I just passingly heard that like years ago, and I kind of forgot to read into it until right this minute. But yeah, what do you think that creature was? Do you think that it was simply just a bird, or was it something else entirely? Let me know what it was down in the comments. And now we're going to move on to this pretty scary alien abduction story. And I know that some of you saw the short that I put out on Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, whichever one it was, and even that one had a pretty terrifying experience of an abduction. I can't imagine being out in the woods having a campfire, which would be literally my backyard, and then something like that coming out of the trees, and then me not being able to do anything, and then just waking up hours later. That would be, I don't even want to think about the shape I'd be in. So, for this one, it happened in March of 1978. The guy was 16 years old. His name was Luis Carlos Serra. And during this day, he was just out in the wilds near his home in the village of Penalva. What he was doing was he was collecting guava fruit for his family. This area, as you can imagine, is covered in a thick jungle, which for a lot of people, you'd be really able to get lost in there pretty quickly. But for Luis, this was a common activity. He would go out there many times, hundreds of times. For Luis, this was more of a mundane activity. But as he's out there gathering fruit, he starts to hear a loud noise. He said it sounded like a siren that boomed out of nowhere and reverberated through the trees. This was obviously not a normal sound of the jungle, and obviously wasn't a natural sound either. He even at first thought that it could be from some kind of aircraft. When he looked up to the sky, everything was normal. There were no airplanes. And as he's looking up through this canopy, trying to see an airplane, suddenly he's blinded by this intense bright light. But he really couldn't see what was causing it. And it was so bright that it basically lit up the dim jungle floor. As he stood there, he was scared, but also wondering what could possibly produce this bright light. And then he found that he could not move his body. He felt he was paralyzed. And not only was his body paralyzed, he couldn't yell or really do anything. In fact, he fell to the ground, laying there basically helpless. And then the light did something different. It began to congeal around him until he was totally enveloped by it. And then he felt his body lift off of the forest floor and into the air as if some force was pulling him upwards. Which I cannot imagine the feeling going through your head if you're being lifted in the air like that by some strange light and you're paralyzed and there's nothing you can do. You can't even fight it. Your mind would be racing at that point. But nevertheless, he continued his descent right up through the branches of the canopy and even above the jungle. And that's when he saw what seemed to be the source of light. According to Luis, hovering over the jungle was a large round object with a domed top and lined windows along its side. He said that he was pulled towards this mysterious sphere, and he went right through one of the windows until he was inside of this craft. He says he was then gently lowered toward the floor. From then, 3 humanoid beings in metallic suits and visors stood around him, speaking in some incomprehensible language. And before he began to even try to comprehend what was going on, the craft began to move, and things get even worse from there. Even though his memory is a bit murky, he said the craft went to a place that was dark and devoid of mountains, devoid of the sky, devoid of stars, and no trees. It was just an expanse of some sort of strange tall grass, and nothing but blackness above. He was levitated back out of the craft, and sat down upon a flat rock in a clearing. And then, here's a quote from him about what happened next. "I was taken to a strange land with no trees, and with only tall grass. I do not know how long it took to get there. I went out the window, just as I came in, with nothing supporting my back. I was still paralyzed. It was a strange place that I did not know. It seemed like a field, but there were no birds or sides. The grass was very high, about 1 meter. I did not see any houses or buildings. I couldn't even see the sky. There were no trees or stars. It was very dark. I was still paralyzed, so those people approached me and put a tube in my nose. It didn't hurt. Then they put a transparent ball in my mouth and a liquid down my throat, much too fast. I fell asleep and did not know what happened later until I woke back up in the bush." When Lewis was found, it was 3 days later. He was found by a fisherman. Now, from the fisherman's point of view, this was also just a regular day, and he was just doing what he does, fishing. Then his concentration was totally broken by the screams of a desperate teenage boy that happened to be Lewis. The boy was in pretty rough shape. He still couldn't move, and when asked who he was, he could only respond with these gurgled cries of pain. The fisherman too noticed that there was blood coming from his mouth, and he originally assumed that this boy had been attacked by somebody. But when the authorities arrived and the boy was taken to the hospital, it was found that he had 4 missing teeth, and other teeth were jagged and broken. He also had patches of hair that were just singed off of his body, and by this point he had seemed to have gone into some kind of catatonic state. He was moved to a more modern hospital, and eventually he did come out of this catatonic state and tell everyone what happened. But back to the day that he was found, it seems that there was an intensive search effort to locate the boy, and essentially they could find nothing. And then he just mysteriously showed up 3 days later with broken teeth, a mouthful of blood, and missing hair. In a situation like this, I really have to wonder what the hell they did to him. Especially since you hear some encounters, like that one I did on the podcast a little while ago that I bring up every now and then, where a guy was just taken on a tour of the UFO and was shown that amphibious kind of being that was in like suspended animation. You have ones like that, and then you have ones like this. Now clearly that would imply that there are different kinds of these beings that would have different intentions for us. But I still believe that none of them are good, because if they were, why do it like this? Why not just come up to you and ask you? It's always some weird type of events that eventually lead to you taking ayahuasca in a cave or something like that, and interacting with beings that you couldn't even comprehend. Or in some other cases I read, people go totally crazy and they end up naked in the desert and their whole lives are destroyed. So I don't think that, regardless of what they say, that any of these beings have anything good for us. But back to what happened here. A UFO researcher and journalist named Bob Pratt would go to the region to interview Lewis and many other locals about what had happened. He also found out that there had been several other UFO sightings in the area at the time. Pratt would also interview the medical personnel who had examined the boy, including a neurologist and 2 psychiatrists. He even spoke with the town's mayor, none of who had any rational explanation for his condition when found. And then in August of that same year, another researcher, Albert Rosales, said that there was a sighting of 3 glowing humanoids in silver coveralls and round translucent helmets in a field near the same area that this boy had been abducted. And to be honest, for me, the fact that other people saw this UFO kind of insinuates that they were looking for somebody to take, and that this maybe was premeditated. Now I've heard a lot of theories about why they keep abducting humans, and one of them that's quite interesting to me is that we have a soul and they don't. And they are quite vexed by this, trying to figure out why we're special and why we have something they don't. And they keep trying to like mix human DNA with their DNA to create some kind of hybrids, but those hybrids still don't have a soul. That's one theory that I like because, it kind of makes humans special, and that's what we are. It could also be something totally different where we're just like cattle to them. It's really hard to say. But what do you think of this whole encounter, and even the thoughts I had during and after when talking about it? Do you agree with me? Do you think something different? Do you totally disagree with me? Why do you think that these things seem to abduct humans all the time? And what do you think they did to Lewis when he was 16 years old? And next up here, I also have another kind of UFO sighting. There's no real encounter, it's just a really odd sighting. So here it is. I was in the high desert with my telescope. The dark skies out here looked magnificent. I was with my uncle, my dad, and my brother. All of a sudden, my dad yells, "Holy shit, look at that thing. It's stopping and starting." My dad was a captain in the Air Force, and really not prone to outbursts like this. My uncle can't see at all what he's talking about. I have some experience with astronomy, and I immediately spot it. Chills run down my spine as I watch it dart across the sky in short bursts, only to come to a stop immediately afterward, moving maybe 5 degrees worth of sky every second and then stopping for a second. My brain is going numb at what I'm witnessing. There's no way this is a satellite or the ISS. My dad is in awe. He keeps saying how it's stopping and going. I grab my binoculars I use for spotting for the scope. I find the object within them. It's 3 glowing blue cylinders with 3 red dots on the back end. It's traveling in a perfect sine wave pattern, like a snake quickly moving through the grass. Its motion is mesmerizing. I try and describe it to my dad what I'm seeing. He asks if he can see. I hesitate and watch for another 5 seconds or so. It almost appears to be bending through the sky as if it were flexible. Perhaps this is just how we are able to perceive its motion. I hand my dad the binoculars while continuing to focus on the object. It shoots off into the sky in a bright streak of light, almost like Team Rocket flying off in the distance in the old Pokemon cartoon. We're all completely stunned by what we just witnessed. It's truly the only bizarre experience that I can't chalk up to some kind of hallucination. And some things I've had happen I can't explain any other way either, just because of its shared nature with my dad. I'm almost certain some alien life is here and watching us or watching over us in some capacity as a result of this. So let me know what you think that one was. And the part that I found quite interesting about that one is that he said it looked like it was kind of bending through the sky, which kind of asked the question to me, is it from this universe? Is it like another dimensional thing? Because I know we've all talked about like extra dimensional beings. I don't know how you all feel about that, but I've definitely heard stories of like very strange things that interact in weird ways with our universe or just our planet, our lives, and everything else. They react in ways that should be impossible, or ways that just don't make sense to us. And one thing that gets me about all these encounters, stories, and experiences is that we're only hearing the ones from the people that came back. We don't exactly get to hear the ones from the people who just got abducted and we just never saw them again. Or even like the ones that are super tame and they went off with them. I can't remember the guy's name, but he had disappeared and then he left his mother a note saying that he went off with the aliens or whatever. And ones like that, I can't fathom just like leaving your entire life behind and just going off into space like that. But for a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, they would love to just like screw off from Earth, leave everything behind, and just go see the universe. Which I think would be really cool too, but I just can't trust these beings. Because, just the way they interact with people, the way they do things, it really doesn't put you in mind of anything that's benign or friendly. It's like they pretend to be friendly, and then when they get you, well, we don't know because they never come back. But let me know what you think about all these. And if you like this episode of the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any topics that you'd like me to look into or even just talk about in the podcast, then leave them down in the comments below. And I think with that, I will leave it here. It's a little shorter than last week, but I think I'll leave it here. And I will see you on Sunday. Thank you for pulling up a stump to hear me yap and ramble. And thank you for watching. I hope you had a good week. I hope you have a better weekend. And I will see you Sunday.